In this video, I'm going to tell you about how a careless HOA Karen had my pickup truck towed from literally right in front of my own home, saying diesel vehicles are unlawful. Here's precisely what occurred. Let's get to it. To give a little background, I reside in a peaceful suburban community that is controlled by a relatively strict HOA. Until recently, their regulations never really bothered me, largely because I didn't pay much heed to them. Whenever they left notices on my door, I'd simply throw them aside without bothering to read them. Honestly, I regarded them as nothing more than a nuisance, and I frequently joked about their scheme of things with some neighbors I regularly meet for a drink. All of that changed after the incident. One Saturday morning, without warning, I woke up to the sound of my pickup being towed straight off the road. It was sitting right in front of my residence, not blocking anyone's property or breaking any rules I could see, yet there it was, being pulled onto a tow truck. I ran out into the street, still half clothed, just in time to attack the tow operator and demand to know what in the world was happening. They were just about to pull away when I caught them, and the tow truck driver looked downright shocked. Granted, they may have been because I had barely managed to put a shirt on and probably looked like a madman. However, after a very few confused minutes, I eventually figured out that this was not a misunderstanding at all. Apparently, someone else had called him and asked to have their truck towed away because it was not starting. That is right. Someone had impersonated me and called for my truck to get towed away right out from under my nose. To be honest, I think they even planned out the part about me being asleep when it happened. As I soon came to discover, the perpetrator had been watching me closely for quite a while. So I have no doubt whatsoever that she knew exactly what my schedule was and when she could steal my truck while I was asleep. Unfortunately, the tow truck driver had only been given my address, so I didn't have a lead straight to whoever had perpetrated this. They also gave him a name, which sounded kind of fake to me, but at least I knew it was a woman, if you can believe it. The fake first name was Karen, so part of me wondered if this was someone messing around and trying to play a prank on me. My truck saved, I decided to park it in the garage and then went back inside to try to get ready for my day. I got about 5 minutes into my morning routine before there was a sharp knock on the door. When I went to answer it, fully clothed this time, I found that it was one of my neighbors who I only vaguely recognized. I thought she had been one of the harpies that went on and on about the HOA stuff, but I was not entirely sure. Not until she gleefully taunted that my nasty diesel truck was finally gone. In her words, "This is what happens when you ignore the HOA warnings." On a whim, I asked her name. Different last name, but you guessed it, she was indeed named Karen. The sheer audacity of this woman. And by the way, guys, you know who I really miss from our old stories? Of course, it is Brittany Karen. Well, actually, I think her name was Brittany Karen. Yeah, that was one of the absolute classic stories. Anyway, maybe we will see Brittany Karen again at some point in our life. Let's see. So I guess she really did not seem to realize that she had made a mistake, because then she just continued ranting, laughing about how I had finally received my just desserts for flaunting the HOA bylaws. According to her, if I ever wanted to see my truck again, then I'd immediately start paying my HOA dues as well as the back fees that had accumulated according to her. Oh, and after I did that, then I could have my truck back, but I would not be allowed to park it in this neighborhood. I would have to keep it elsewhere. I was floored. It took me a while to realize that she actually thought my truck had been successfully towed. She had no idea that it was sitting pretty in the garage right at this moment. And seriously, I had no idea what she was talking about regarding this diesel thing. It was the first I'd ever heard about diesel trucks not being allowed in the neighborhood. But she was so incredibly adamant that I was wrong. Maybe it had been the subject of one of those notices they tried to stick on my front door. Who knows? Now, I could have let her walk away thinking that she had one, but I just had to see the look on her face when she realized that my truck had not been dragged off after all. And therefore, when she threw a few more taunts at me and left, I headed straight to my garage and opened the door. Just as I hoped, she hadn't quite reached her own house when she turned back to look at the noise, and she got an eyeful of my pristine truck. Then, just for good measure, I hopped it and decided to take a quick jaunt down to the store, making sure to drive right past her on my way. It was a bit childish, I'll be the first to admit it, but damn, it felt good to see her jaw drop open like that. She tried to yell something after me, but by the time she found her tongue, I was already long gone, and all I could hear was her incoherent screeching. Part of me hoped that maybe she had learned her lesson and backed down, but deep down I knew better than to expect that. I'd met Karen's type before, and they were the sort to always come back for more, especially if they had been humiliated. And sure enough, just a couple days later, I got a letter in the mail that looked concerningly official. It was from the HOA and seemed to be a list of fines that I owed for apparently disrespecting the bylaws of a prestigious homeowner association. Apparently, they thought that I was single-handedly ruining the neighborhood's reputation by not letting my truck get illegally towed away. But fair enough, if that's how they wanted to do this, then two could play that game. I hopped online, found the HOA website, and downloaded a copy of their bylaws. It took the better part of an afternoon to get through their insultingly long-winded writing, but I was eventually satisfied that there were definitely no bylaws that I was in violation of. Once I was clear on that point, then the obvious next step was to escalate things. I could have just sat back and watched as the HOA embarrassed themselves even further, but I was not going to be happy until they knew they lost. As such, I browsed around for lawyers and searched for someone who specialized in this sort of suburban nonsense. It was easier than I expected. So I assume that people like Karen have been causing serious problems for enough neighbors like me to make a viable career out of arbitrating such disputes. When I got in touch with the lawyer, she pretty much confirmed everything I thought. It would be a good idea to collect as much evidence as I could of my neighbor trying to unlawfully intimidate me into giving money. In particular, if I had evidence of her trying to tow my car, then my lawyer said that criminal charges might even be on the table. I hadn't considered that angle up to this point, and to be honest, I was not sure if I wanted to escalate things like that. After all, I had foiled the attempt, and it had really just ended up being irritating at worst. Getting in trouble with the law could ruin someone's life, so I was not eager to call in the cops and have them sort things out. At least that's how I felt until Karen made another attempt to get my car towed. And this time, she was much more successful. While I was out on a jog, I came back to find my truck gone without a trace. I'd only been gone about half an hour, so Karen must have typed it pretty precisely. I may sound calm about it now, but I was absolutely livid at the time. Pissed beyond belief, I called the non-emergency line to report that my truck had been stolen. They wanted me to come in and fill out some paperwork, which I happily did. As I found out later, Karen did not actually call in a tow truck driver this time. I guess she thought that might just fail. So instead, she went and rented a whole tow truck herself ahead of time, waited for me to be out of the house, and then quickly stole my truck during her window of opportunity. It was actually kind of impressive. It's just a shame that she applied all that planning and patience to such pointless pettiness. Immediately after going to the police, I went to my lawyer and told her about the latest developments. She was absolutely over the moon. She said this case just went from a 50-50 to a slam dunk, and she was going to fight tooth and nail to make sure I got every single cent I could. Not to mention that she would get my truck back pronto. Honestly, I'm a little afraid of her. I really wouldn't want to be on my lawyer's bad side, and I'm very glad that she represented my case. Needless to say, she found out that this was not actually the first time that my HOA got into a bit of legal trouble. There was an unusual number of theft reports from the neighborhood over the years, but many of the investigations went nowhere or got dropped because the victims ended up moving away. We figured that they got fed up with the HOA and just left instead of having to deal with their tyranny. That alone would not have been enough to seal their fate, but as it turns out, they did not do a very good job of hiding my truck. When the police went to the neighborhood just to look around and see if my neighbors really were foolish enough to stash the truck on their property, they discovered that that is exactly what happened. I know, I am shocked too. They really just stuck it in their garage, which the police realized because they had to move out so much of their crap in order to make room. The whole driveway was full of junk, and when the cops went up to the front door and asked to take a look in the garage, they found my truck. From that point, it was pretty much out of my hands. I just sat back and watched while the whole thing imploded. Funnily enough, the HOA was actually part of a larger organization, so there was a mechanism available for people to make complaints and have hearings about alleged mistreatment. At my lawyer's urging, that is exactly what I did, focusing on the harassment, the attempted theft of my truck, and then the actual theft. Frankly, I did not expect all that much from the complaint. I figured that the whole organization was probably full of Karen's type, but I ended up pleasantly surprised. I actually got a letter deeply apologizing for her behavior and stating that she would be removed from her position immediately. Part of that is probably because they were so embarrassed by the footage, but I think they might have caught wind of the criminal proceedings at around the same time. So I'm sure that kicked their butts into high gear. Last I heard, Karen had become a bit of a pariah. I suppose it's hard to keep a stunt like that theft under wraps, so the entire community knew what exactly she had done. I'm sure it also made some of them wonder about other things that had mysteriously gone missing over the years. I wouldn't be surprised if she ended up moving out of the community completely, but that has not happened quite yet, which I know because I regularly see her scowling ferociously when I drive by in my diesel truck. And yeah, guys, if you ever had any awful neighbors like this, please feel free to share your stories in the comments because I would love to hear about them. And the next one is another revenge story concerning incredibly awful neighbors. It is titled "Neighbor Was Stealing Service from My Wi-Fi, so I Messed Up Her Business." Some background: I had moved into an apartment while my home was being renovated. This was around the time Wi-Fi first came out, so I was a bit naive about setting it up, and I let the installers do all the work. After a couple months, I noticed my video and download speeds had been reduced to a crawl, and that my ping time was in the lower to mid triple-digit range. And yeah, guys, that is an absolute nightmare for sure. Anyway, several calls and a single service visit later, I found out that at least one of my neighbors had tapped into my Wi-Fi. On to the revenge, I changed the name of my router to batch 357 and changed the password to a randomized character string of maximum length. My net speed went back to normal, and my ping time came back down to the low to mid double-digit range. I was in the rental office soon thereafter paying rent when one of my neighbors, a Q20 brunette, came in and started complaining about how the cops had shut down her internet connection. When I asked what made her think that, she said that the cops had posted the badge number. When I asked why they would shut her down, she said she was running an adult webcam service, completely legal but somewhat explicit. What someone does to make money is no concern of mine, as long as they don't steal from me in the process. Anyway, I told her that my service was just fine. So she started the whole bet the eyes and wiggle the tush routine and suggested in a real sweet, seductive voice that I could allow her to tap into my service in exchange for, let's just say, favors. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more. Sure, I said. My router is badge 357 and my password is you. You ruined my business. I have clients depending on me and blah, blah, blah. I just smiled, picked up the receipt for my rent payment, and walked away. I think she eventually got her own service because I've never heard from her again. Although the cold, icy looks she gave me as we passed in the parking lot were somewhat amusing. And yeah, guys, let me tell you, stealing someone's Wi-Fi is never a good idea. Anyway, the next one is a super satisfying, malicious compliance story that is titled, "I Should Cancel on My End." Well, no problem. So I booked accommodation 2 months in advance for St. Patrick's weekend in Dublin. It was a fairly ancient B&B, but for €115, it was a place to sleep and the cheapest option for the busiest weekend of the year in Dublin. It was a one double bed for me, and a buddy to share. It was pay on arrival. 3 weeks before the stay, the accommodation manager messaged me on the app I booked the stay on, telling me there's a problem. I can no longer stay and to cancel on my site immediately. No apology, let alone help offered by them. This was followed by multiple phone calls daily, along with text messages in a harassing nature, saying that I need to cancel now so I can get my money back. Once again, it was pay on arrival. I did not answer the calls or messages telling me to cancel. Something felt off, so I checked the listing for the night I was supposed to stay, and it just so happens the accommodation had been listed again for double the price. So, likely the manager realized that St. Patrick's weekend was a cash grab. Maybe not immediately, but at the property manager's request, I simply rang up Booking.com and told them I would like to cancel my booking. The customer service rep asked why I was canceling, and I explained in detail all the above to her, and things took an unexpected turn for the property manager. Ultimately, the rep agreed the property was acting in an unfair manner, and the solution was that Booking.com would find me accommodation within 1 kilometer. Originally, they tried to get me to stay way outside of the city, but I was not having it of where I intended to stay. The original property would then be liable to cover any difference in cost. So here's the good part. Finding accommodation 3 weeks before St. Patrick's Day in Dublin is about as difficult as trying to light a fire with flint and steel in the rain, which means near impossible. Everything within a 1 kilometer range was booked out except for a well-known 4-star hotel. The room alone cost €350 per night and had 2 double beds, much bigger rooms, and in a nicer location. The customer rep had to get it cleared by her team lead, so I just sat on hold doing chores for 25 minutes. And yeah, guys, to be honest, that is also my experience with Booking.com. I never had issues there, but I always hear of people that have a lot of problems with websites like Booking or Agoda. So I'm curious, have you ever had any issues with them? Let me know in the comments. I'm really curious. Also, eventually they came back and said it was all signed off on, and they will send me a special link. What a treat. I gladly accepted their compromise. This in turn meant the property owner that tried to force me to cancel on my end was now indebted €235, and we got a massive upgrade for the same price we originally had. I had to pay the €350 up front and had to keep receipts and show proof of payment to the booking partner after our stay, but got my refund of €235 the following week. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. Jumping straight into this, I want to give some background to the story. My grandpa recently passed away due to some illnesses he's been fighting on and off for most of his life. In his passing, he left me his property, which came as a shock to all of us because I certainly was not his favorite grandchild. But that's a story for another time. Anyway, this property is roughly 50 acres. So yes, it's a big deal. Most of the property is lush forest, but in the center of it all sits a house. Some would consider it to be more of a small mansion than a house with a long gravel driveway, stretching all the way to the main road nearby. As I'm sure you have guessed, this was where he lived before he passed. However, he did not really keep the place in the best of nick. Lots of rotting planks and damp walls, etc. So I decided I would slowly but surely put some money into the place and do it up. The potential was massive for it to become something just gorgeous. And then the plan would be to either sell it and share the money across my family, or my parents could move in. I live around 6 miles away, so in my free time, I go down and do some work on it. It became one of my favorite hobbies. Anyone who has done up a house will know that although it can be quite tedious, it certainly is satisfying work. So this story begins with a particular weekend in June. This is about 10 months after I had started renovating the place. I was on my way down as usual and noticed that the gate which connected the driveway to the main road was slightly ajar. The lock was loose. I figured that the last time I was there, which was a few days prior, I must have forgotten to lock it and didn't think much of it. Of course, I did slightly worry that someone might have been in and had a snoop around, but I chose to push that thought to the side. On this day, everything was fine, and I had another day of renovating. I would like to point out at this point, the house was not a mess or anything. I basically always put everything away in the shed after a day's work and hoovered all the carpets, etc. You will see why this is relevant later. Oh, and also, I did have professionals in too. It was not just me doing this. I would have never gotten the majority of it done in such time. Otherwise, moving on, this day happened to be the last before I went on a very long and boring work trip for 2 months. I made sure to lock the gate. But after those months had passed and I was on my way back to the property, I saw the lock was loose again. But this time, as I drove up the driveway, I saw a car parked out the front of the house. I froze. I saw a few lights on in the house and my heart started beating. I could not think of who else had access to the property. My mother keeps the spare key and she lived hours away and has a different car. So I did what every stupid person in a horror movie does. I unlocked the door and walked inside yelling, "Hello!" I heard quiet voices and then heard footsteps. A man and a woman, both in robes, appeared at the top of the stairs. "Excuse me, what are you doing here?" "We have rented the place for the whole week," the man demanded. "Sir, this is my property and I most certainly don't rent it out. What are you doing here?" The couple looked between themselves. "A lady named Karen rented this out to us. Is this really not her property?" It did seem a little sketchy that she had to pick the gate lock. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I got them to call this Karen lady, and within 10 minutes she had arrived. What seems to be the problem here? She asked, all smiles. Who are you, and why are you renting out my property? I asked. Sir, this is my property. What? You heard me. This is my property. It most surely is not. Where's your proof? Well, I've been renting out the place for the past few weeks. How could I be renting out something that is not mine? Past few weeks? Ma'am, you know this is not your property, and you've been trespassing and letting others trespass for weeks. I think we're going to call the cops. They will sort this. The man from the top of the stairs spoke. Nope. Nonsense. No need. You two clear out, Karen demanded, clearly nerfed by the threat of the cops, knowing that she had no proof for all of this. After a lot of arguing between the couple and Karen, the pair left and Karen stayed put. Listen, what's the issue with me renting this place? She asked. And I now, of course, knew the real reason. The gate had been ajar the first time I noticed it. What's the issue? The issue is that this is not your property and you had no permission. Well, I'm going to rent it out anyway. I need the money. Her voice was raising. No, you are absolutely not. Who do you think you are? You have no right to do this. Stop acting so entitled. How dare you? That's the rudest thing I've heard all day. I'm your senior, sir. Don't disrespect me. Yeah, I can tell, I remarked, causing her face to redden slightly. I cannot believe this, she screamed and stomped out, getting in her car and driving away. I stayed over that night, ordering a new gate and lock to be fitted the very next day. I also ordered CCTV and filed the police report because I had a very big suspicion that I had not heard the end of her. The next day I had everything fitted and unfortunately had to go back to work the following afternoon. It was not long before I got a notification from the CCTV app I had installed on my phone. I happened to be in a meeting when this notification went off, and it was just a regular bus like the rest of them. So I did not end up actually getting to it until an hour later, and by then it was too late. I clicked on and felt my heart almost stop once I saw what was unfolding on the lawn in front of the house. Karen was having a bonfire, and around the bonfire were a good 30 to 40 people. A bonfire that was very close to the house. I almost couldn't believe it. I called the police straight away and started racing over. The police got there before I did, and I saw where Karen had climbed the gate. The police broke through with some big metal clippers. I drove up to the house and saw that my worst fears had been confirmed. The house was on fire. It turns out the bonfire was certainly too close and must have spread to the house, which is primarily a wooden build with a gust of wind. After getting over the shock of the house partially in flames, I looked around and saw that most of the guests had run away and that Karen was currently in cuffs being detained by two officers, one who had a black eye, presumably from her. And there was also a fire truck putting out the flames. Sir, are you the owner? One of the officers asked me, kneeling down to my level, as at this point I'd gotten out of the car and collapsed to my knees. I stammered, not barely heard what he said after that. Something about pressing gestures that they would punish this lady and get my statement after the fire was sorted with. So that is what happened. The fire was put out. A very large chunk of the house was gone or deteriorating. I could tell I would need new beams all over and a new roof at the very least. Sir, I know this is hard, but this is my property. I suddenly heard Karen scream from where she was being held. You? I yelled as I stormed over to her. You did this. How could you? I wanted to have a bonfire. And hey, if it meant destroying your hard work in the process, what's the issue? What have I ever done to you? I asked, and she stared at me with this look as if she wanted to say more but couldn't. It was almost a how do you not know look. To this day, I still don't know if there's something I had done to her, but that is an adventure to have another time. She did not respond, and that's when I started giving my statement to the police. I then went to my car and pulled out the deeds to the property to show them. Thankfully, I didn't keep them in the house. I also showed them the CCTV footage, and that was all they needed. They hauled her away and gave me a ride with them to the station. No court case was needed. After a property surveyor looked at the property, they would just charge her straight away for what she did. Of course, she was charged with trespassing and arson was on there too. But as it turns out, she was stealing the credit cards of the people who she rented my property to. So, she went down for fraud as well. If you are wondering how she managed to get a key for the door, I still have no idea. She didn't say how and just kept insisting it was her property. Part of me thinks there might be more to this story. Either way, she got 15 years in prison for the listed above. The property surveyor finalized that over $1 million of damages had been done. So of course that fine went straight to her. They also added a few $100,000 on top for the labor it will take to repair the place. I'm sure she will be spending the rest of her life once out of prison trying to pay that back. All this happened a few months ago, so of course the house is not fully fixed yet. We have decided not to sell the place. We feel like it would be giving her what she wanted, if we do in a weird way. I'm still weirded out by the whole situation, and I'm glad she got what she deserved, but I of course still wish that none of this ever happened in the first place. All I can hope is that after those 15 years, she does not come back. But something tells me I might not be so lucky. And yeah, guys, before we end the video, we will read one last funny story from our petty revenge. And it is titled, "Got My Boss to Finally Pay Me My Way." So a few decades ago, my first paycheck job at 13 years old was running an ice cream parlor. The problem was the owner would delay our pay, often handing out paychecks and cautioning the employees and me not to cash them for a few days. The guy and his wife were matching POS, and I knew the end was near for the business when the ice cream trucks and paper supply vendors did not show up one week. Boss and wife were arguing about dollars in the back room, and I realized that they were going to stiff all of us again and then go out of business. So that Saturday night, when the ice cream parlor was hopping, I didn't put the dollars in the safe. One by one, as we got cash for the food, I would call up the other employees and tell them to come in right now to get their checks. Then I cashed them on the spot using the money that was in the till. Boss and the wife showed up on Sunday morning to a filthy shop, a safe full of checks that they wrote and had no intention of ever paying out to a bunch of kids, and my resignation taped to the cash register. And yeah, guys, thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like the video, and I will see you again.